Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. We are living, it would appear, in a golden age. The price of gold reached historic highs this week, and that has some people cashing in.
I'm here to get a quote for a scrap silver and scrap gold. I came 3 weeks ago for the first time. It's in the couple thousand range.
I was selling my gold about 1 month ago because I heard gold was going up, and I thought, why not keep life fluid rather than in bricks or whatever. And my gold was in charms collected in Europe in 1968, and they had been in my safety deposit box ever since. And I thought, I'm not using them, use the money.
Those are people outside the Canada Gold location in Vancouver. That shop buys and sells scrap jewelry. CEO Tyler Whitmore says it has been busy at locations right across this country.
Business recently has been seeing historical growth. We're seeing lineups out the door across all of our stores. Customers are bringing in gold rings, chains, earrings, watches, things like that are just sitting in drawers. It depends on the item, the purity of the item. A necklace, depending on the size, you might be looking at $500 to $1,000.
While some people are selling their gold for cash, others have been buying it. Gold prices climbed above $5,000 US an ounce on Monday. Douglas Porter is the chief economist at Bank of Montreal. Doug, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you make of the fact that people are lining up outside gold stores, cashing in on the jewelry that maybe was just collecting dust in a drawer?
Well, it's pretty amazing. When you look at it, gold prices have gone up by almost $1,000 just since the start of the year, and they've basically doubled from a year ago. I think we've gone into the full speculative realm now. It's moved from going from a move that you could explain by central bank buying and weakness in the U.S. dollar to something much more than that. This is really turned into I would say a global speculative. I'd almost have to use the word frenzy.
Tell me more about this. Why? $5,000 an ounce. It was just a few months ago. People were surprised that gold was getting close to $4,000 an ounce. Why is there? It seems like a ceiling that is rising and rising and rising when it comes to the price of gold.
Yeah, and one thing I would point out is it's not just gold in isolation here. We've also seen silver and some of the other precious metals. If anything, silver has actually risen much more quickly than gold. So initially, it was a move by some central banks, for instance, China and maybe Russia, to move away from the U.S. dollar. They began to accumulate gold. This is what really kicked off the strength. But it's really broadened out, and it's moving so quickly now that it's really attracted attention among all investors. And frankly, it's really gone beyond literally into uncharted territory. For instance, if you think of the last great run in gold, it was in the late 1970s, early 80s, and that followed a period of very, very high inflation. Inflation averaged more than 10% through the 1970s. Even if you were to adjust those prices back in 1979 and 80 and put them into today's values, we're still way beyond that, which shows you just how incredible this run has become. And what I find interesting is in the last few years, the narrative has been that Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies were going to be the new digital gold, and we're going to basically step in and replace gold. Well, they've been silent throughout this episode. In fact, if anything, cryptocurrencies have actually pulled back. And I do think that part of what's going on here is those who were trying to avoid the U.S. dollar and really didn't have much faith in other currencies were looking for an alternative. Initially, it gone into cryptocurrencies. Well, I think a great amount of that money is now shifted over into precious metals and mostly gold.
How much of this has to do with Donald Trump? The U.S. president, anybody who has seen images of his changes to the Oval Office and other parts of the White House knows, is a big fan of gold. And yet there are people who pin what's happening right now on his policies.
Yeah, I think he certainly played a part in this. By aggravating relations with much of the rest of the world. There is, as I said, there is a drive to so-called de-dollarize or to move away from the U.S. dollar. There are some questions over the currency's long-term outlook, but I will point out that gold was very strong, really since about 2021 or so. I think it really got kicked off first and foremost by the run-up of inflation that we saw during and after the pandemic. That's really what I think got the ball rolling. But there's no question that it's gathered steam in the last year, and I would say that the policies of the administration have probably led some to, as I said, to try to move away from the U.S. dollar. They're looking for good alternatives, and of course, gold has always been there. It has its ebbs and flows, but it certainly seems to be the biggest beneficiary of the move away from the U.S. dollar.
Why are those precious metals seen as a safe haven in rough seas? To your point, it's not just gold. Silver, somebody said, was behaving like gold on steroids. You have copper that is reaching very high prices as well. Why are those metals seen as a safe haven?
So, first of all, I would say copper is a little bit of a different animal.
Okay.
I think the strength we're seeing in there is somewhat unrelated. But silver, yeah, I mean, good point. It's almost quadrupled in the last year. I think it basically it goes back many centuries that that gold was always seen as a safe harbor, something that you could transport or you could take with you. You can actually touch it and feel it.
You can put the gold bars under your bed. It's not stashed away in a bank somewhere. You have that value there under the mattress.
You can, and it's recognized around the world. Some would say the U.S. dollar is like that as well. U.S. dollars could be accepted almost anywhere, but I think, U.S. dollars can be inflated away, and they can always print those. It takes a long time to actually add to the amount of ounces of gold that are out there worldwide. But, it's a historic relic, maybe not so much of a relic anymore. And as I said, it's widely recognized around the world as a store of value.
Gold is Canada's second largest export after oil. Is that right?
So in the latest month, in the month of October, we're actually getting trade data for November in a matter of minutes here. But in the latest month, gold actually moved ahead of oil and motor vehicles for 1 month. Now, some of that gold is actually not physically crossing the border. It's interesting when they count trade that it's the balance of payments, so it's really just the money going back and forth across the border. Like that gold could be in someone's vault, but if you were to sell it to an investor in say Britain, the gold doesn't necessarily have to physically move, but it gets counted as an export. And I think to a large extent that's exactly what's going on here. But yes. We are the fourth largest producer in the world, and suddenly gold has become our number one export. I never thought that gold would be a force driving the Canadian dollar, but now that it is at least temporarily our number one merchandise export, suddenly you have to talk about gold as being a factor helping support the Canadian dollar.
I was going to say, what does that mean if the price of gold is going up, and this is now, at least briefly, our largest export? What does that mean for the Canadian economy?
Well, it's interesting. The reality is that it doesn't mean that much because, and not to talk down the industry, there are roughly 20,000 or a little bit more than that people who are employed in the gold mining sector. It's a significant industry, but not a particularly large one. The reality is most of the strength in gold will benefit people who are holders of gold, and yes, it does benefit the gold companies that are on the TSX. Probably a lot of your listeners are invested in gold, and they don't necessarily even know it. If you have an index fund that's in the Toronto Stock Exchange, or your mutual fund holds a lot of Toronto stocks, or even your pension fund is heavily invested in the Toronto Stock Exchange, they're probably heavily invested in gold as well. It's one of the reasons why the Toronto Stock Exchange rose by almost 30% last year. Gold was a very big part of that solid gain. I wouldn't say it was the lion's share of that, but it was one of the reasons why the Toronto market was one of the strongest in the world. It was partly thanks to gold. So a lot of it is it's basically a wealth effect. For many Canadians, where you will sort of quietly see some gains from the strength in gold. Two
quick questions before I let you go. One is, do you worry that this is a bubble that will pop?
I do. We have seen this movie before. For those who'd like to study another episode, something like this, I would look back at 79 and 80. It doesn't mean that gold is going to completely erase its gains, but at some point, it is just going to get so far beyond any fundamentals that it will pull back sharply at some point. I cannot tell you when that point will be. Our gold analysts, our commodity analysts, at the start of the year put out a piece saying that the bullish case could see gold going as high as $8,000 an ounce by next year. And given what's happened in the last month, that's easily achievable. But yes, I do worry that as quickly as it went up, it could pull back very abruptly as well.
And so, just very briefly, I'm not asking you for investment advice, but if somebody wants to get on the bandwagon, what would you say to them?
I would say be very cautious in terms of adding. I'm not necessarily dissuading. I actually do think it makes sense for any investor to have at least a small part of their portfolio in gold or in gold related shares, but I would be very careful, especially after the run it's had. I'll just quote not exactly quote, but paraphrase Warren Buffett. He said, "For most goods and services, people wait until they're on sale, but for some reason, when financial assets run wild, they actually want to jump in and buy." And he never liked that fact that people always wanted to buy financial assets after they had gone up a lot. And I think this would be a classic case where Warren Buffett would not be too happy with investors piling on.
Doug, good to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Douglas Porter is the chief economist at the Bank of Montreal. He was in Toronto. Those are some of the practical reasons that people are putting their money into gold. My next guest says the attraction to gold goes well beyond the financial aspect. The people around the world have treasured it since the dawn of civilization. John Rapley wrote an article for the British online magazine Unheard about what he calls gold's mystical allure. John is a political economist, author of Icarus Economics, Why Rich Economies Are Struggling, How to Fix Them. John, hello to you.
Hi, good morning to you.
What do you make of the gold frenzy? Again, people lining up at pawn shops, rooting through, perhaps some of the heirlooms that they were given, thinking, I could cash in now. This is just collecting dust. Let's get some money.
Well, I think Doug Porter really sort of, he ticked all the right boxes. It is a mystery. It's quite mystifying. I think there is some element of FOMO going on at this stage now. People just getting in because it is going up by the day, kind of rather what happened in during the parabolic phase of cryptocurrency. And I think there is also some, although it's difficult to tell how much, there is some purchases by central banks which are looking to diversify their reserves out of the dollar. But the main driver does seem to be retail purchases, people who I think are being driven by two things. One is just trying to catch, trying to opportunistically ride that wave. And the other one is, I think there has been a long concern about currency debasement, and I think it's now coming to a mature phase, particularly because it's practically now the explicit policy of the Trump administration to keep increasing the money supply, and inflation be damned. If the inflation statistics aren't good, you fire the messenger and you get a new one. So I think there is a combination of both kind of that rational calculation, but also I think there is this kind of mystical element because it's a strange thing, gold. I mean, it has no practical uses, and yet we love it because, we love it. In other words, humans have always loved it, and so possessing it, gave one power. And I think that is almost, we're supposed to live in a rational age, but it's an almost atavistic lure, to sort of, go back in sort of times of uncertainty to what our ancestors did, believing that will always hold value.
Let me ask you about that. You wrote about that. You said that gold, these are your words, produces nothing, and unlike other precious metals, such as silver, has virtually no industrial applications, but its value derives from a tautology. We want gold because we want it. Everyone wants it, so we know it has value, therefore we want it. What is that about?
Well, it's just that. I mean, and trying to explain why people want it using any kind of rational explanation is very difficult. I mean, I think Warren Buffett expressed it most pithily. He said a Martian would scratch his head looking at the behavior of humans, that we send armies of people, we hire armies of people to go into the earth, deep into the earth, to dig it out of the ground. We bring it to the surface. Then we send another army of people deep into the earth to dig vaults. We bury it underneath. And then we hire yet a third army of people to stand guard over it to keep it safe. He said, what on earth is driving this? Because it's not really used as a currency. It doesn't have the values of a currency. As I say, it has very few industrial uses. People aren't buying it because there's suddenly going to be a boom in sort of fillings. And so but yet it has always had this intense attraction. People have killed over it historically. You know, the conquistadors sort of went deep into the, heart of Latin America, what became Latin America, trying to find it. And it's driven humans to all sorts of extreme lengths throughout history. But as I say, if anybody said they could explain rationally why that's so, I think they'd be themselves a very rich person.
There are phrases that we use that people perhaps don't think about the roots of. One of them is the gold standard, which means the best of the best. There was the gold standard. I mean, what do you make of the use of that and the popularity of that phrase, given the what you've just said?
Well, it's like saying, something is as good as gold, right? It's the same sort of idea that there's an elemental quality that I think that I suspect what it comes down to is that unlike money, unlike, for that matter, cryptocurrency, which are both human creations, gold supply cannot be manipulated in any way by humans. It's fixed by nature. So it's almost as if you say, well, there's an ultimate arbiter over which we have no control, and we are left with what is existing in nature. And I think that is one of the things which gives it that sort of, literally rock solid value to people, that, well, when central banks are flooding the economy, printing money, willy-nilly, at least the gold supply won't go up, and therefore it will rise in value. And I think there is an element of that in there.
You quoted another economist who called what we're living through right now a polycrisis. These are tricky times, and it goes back to what we were saying with Doug, that people are looking for some sort of safe harbor. If people cling to gold during uncertain times, what does it say about the rise of the price of gold right now?
Well, yeah, and that brings back the question, is this just a bubble that's going to burst? What sort of damage will it do? Will it burst? Is there something structural going on so that that, for example, if it is the case that a lot of this is being driven by central bank purchases, and there is an attempt to, some of the stable coins, for example, are sort of backed by gold. And if there is, in fact, an attempt to sort of create new currencies or to create, as the Chinese are doing, new payment regimes which can be backed by gold, is there going to be a structural increase in demand for gold that corresponds to the fall in demand for fiat currency, and most especially the US dollar? That is what we really can't say for sure. I agree with Doug Porter. I think this is a bubble. It's going to burst, but how far it will go down and what sort of damage it can do, that is the great unknown. I'd be more confident speaking about some of the other parts of the market I consider frothy about the damage they'll do on the way down or what the impact will be. But gold, it's hard to say. I think some of this is people wanting to keep it for the long term.
I'm going to let you go, but have you ever insisted in investing in gold yourself? Is this something that you've thought about, getting the gold bars, maybe putting some money into gold, given the uncertainty that we live through right now?
Oh, many, many years ago, I actually bought some gold coins, some maple leaf coins for my children at the time. Certainly are my children, but I bought it for them at the time, which they immediately turned around and sold to buy things like skateboards and pay for, soccer fees. But, it would be worth 10 times, or actually more like about 16 times what I bought them for. They were very cheap at the time. So, but I had a sense that there was going to be a long run up in the price of gold for the reasons I said, having to do with debasement. And at least on that one, I can at least sort of say I told you so.
Best not to think about the value that could have been accrued. I'm sure the skateboards were exciting at the time. John, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
John Rapley is a political economist and the author of Icarus Economics, Why Rich Economies Are Struggling and How to Fix Them. That book comes out next month. You can also find him. He has a weekly column in the Globe and Mail. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.